You are listening to Mystery Media Group.
Yay! I'm here to tell you a true story that'll make your blood boil. Listener discretion is advised. Please keep your arms and legs inside the vehicle at all times. Hi, I'm Cozy, and you're listening to Not So Cozy Crimes. It was a hot August day in 1996 in Green River, Wyoming. Bob, Duke, and his wife Liana and their 5-year-old son Eric packed up their Jeep and headed out for a family day trip to the Flaming Gorge. They decided they were going to have a picnic and pulled off to an overlook that outlooked the reservoir. Eric chased the lizards and bugs and had a wonderful time. Liana and Eric threw rocks off the edge into the reservoir. Bob went back to the Jeep to get a soda, and next thing you know, he heard Liana scream his name. He turned around and they were gone. They had fallen off the edge. Well, that's what he told the police. Accident? Not so sure. Bob had a friend growing up and his name was Roger. They were super close. They lived right next door to each other. They did lots of things together. However, they were the complete opposite. Roger had a reputation that was not so good. He was into drugs and small crimes. The police knew him well. On the other hand, Bob was a great kid. Straight-laced. He was going to go to college. He was trying to get out of Green River, and he was going to make a man out of himself. Bob and Roger grew up close. They went to school together. They played pool together. Bob had ambitions of being rich and going and doing things on his own. However, Roger, he really admired Bob, but he got into lots of trouble. He dropped out in the 11th grade. He got into lots of small crimes. Oftentimes was compared to Bob, and, being compared to somebody is never fun. So Bob's dreams of getting out of Green River and going to college got squashed when his 17-year-old girlfriend, Liana Davis, got pregnant. Liana Davis was shy, pretty brunette. Liana and him had dated for a while, and from pressure from his parents and the pregnancy, they ended up getting married in 1991. They had a son, Eric, 3 months after the wedding. Now Bob needed to find a way to provide for his small family, and he began a small job as a carpet layer. Although this is not something he went to college for, he was one of the best in the business. He grew his business well. He was told he was the best in the business. He provided very well for his family. He was a good father. However, some people did find him as a cold, standoff guy, but from the outside, you could tell that he loved his wife and his kid, Eric, and he was overall a very good dad for his age in the young 20s. Bob envied Roger for having fun in his early 20s and being able to do whatever he wanted. However, it was the opposite, where Roger envied Bob with the perfect family and a successful job and a beautiful wife. But, whatever. Roger wanted that, but he was okay continuing on with the drugs and the small crimes and just kind of doing what he did best. When Roger turned 21, Bob asked him to buy him a gun because he was not old enough, and Roger did so. Roger knew lots of people in the crime world. He kind of had connections and was able to get things that most people were not able to get for him. But he didn't think anything of it. Bob never came across as someone who would use those in the wrong way. He just thought maybe he wanted it for hunting or whatever, just to keep his family safe and keep it in the house, and who knows. Liana was a homemaker, and she had always wanted to open up a little craft store, and Bob helped Liana fulfill that dream of opening a small craft store, and they worked together for a little while, and Liana ran her own shop, and Bob waved carpet. Liana soon didn't like Roger. They knew each other in high school. She never liked him to begin with. She knew that Roger and Bob were really good friends, so she kind of didn't mess around with it. But after Roger buying Bob the gun, Liana decided that she wanted Bob to stay away from Roger because he was a bad influence. And, Bob had tattoos and piercings, and he smoked, and he liked weed and all the things that are so bad, right? I'm just kidding. But anyways, their friendship continued, but not like it used to. They saw each other here and there. They went out to the bar, had boys' nights, but they didn't hang out like they used to because Liana did not like Roger. The morning after Liana and Eric's incident, Roger's mom called and gave him the news. Roger's stomach sank, and he knew instantly that this was not an accident. All of the police officers and the first responders looking at the case to begin with knew that this was no place for a family, This place had lots of rocks, jagged cliffs, just not a good place for somebody to let a 5-year-old little boy run around. So the fact that they had brought them here and he had let them get out and run around, and this just didn't all add up to the first responders and the police officers and the detectives. However, when they got there, Bob was upset. When the detective showed up, he looked in shock, or maybe it was just that he was cold, but according to the detective, Bob told him that he never looked over the edge to see if they were dead. Kevin, the detective, thought that was extremely strange. Why would you not do everything in your power to go down there to save them, to see if they were okay? Who knows? Everybody acts differently in states of shock, but that came off very weird to begin with. Bob watched the search and rescue teams lift the bodies out from under the cliff, and he seemed very unaffected by this. Again, another red flag. Kevin was wondering why Bob would even allow the family to play here. It was so dangerous. Bob and Liana, yeah, they might have been in their young 20s. They may have been a little dumb, but, not that dumb. Did he believe what Bob had said about Liana and him falling off? Not one bit. Roger, on the other hand, also knew that this was no accident. Liana was very overprotective. She kept Eric very close. She would never ever would have let him play that close to the edge, or let alone even get out of a car right next to the edge where there was rocks falling and jagged edges, and it just was no place for a kid, and Liana would never have allowed that in the first place. Eric was a very timid boy as well. He was not the one to go running off chasing bugs and chasing lizards and throwing rocks off the edge. He was very timid, very quiet, kind of liked to stay with his mom, and that was also another thing that stood out to Roger when they had told him what Bob's story was. But, Bob had a good rep and Roger didn't, so, they weren't sure whose word to take for it. 1 month before this incident, Bob had called Roger and asked Roger to kill Liana and their son Eric for money. Roger at the time thought this was just a joke, maybe he was just upset and needed to rant, and that just slipped out of his mouth. He didn't take it too seriously. But then a week later, he asked Bob a question over the phone, and Bob said, "Hey, you never gave me an answer. I need to know, are you going to kill my wife and kid or not? I will give you a whole plan. All you have to do is follow the plan. I'll give you $20,000. We're having a barbecue on Wednesday. I will hide my rifle behind the shed. All you have to do is go grab it, shoot me in the arm, and then shoot Liana and Eric in the head and chest, and you can take out as many neighborhood kids as you need." And that shook Roger. He was shocked, but he knew why Bob had asked him. He was a drug addict and he always needed the money. And, Roger was a lowlife and he was an F-up and he had that criminal background, so he would be the perfect one to do this for him. But Roger said no. He said, "Are you crazy? If you hate your wife so much, just get a divorce. You don't need to murder her. Even I wouldn't do that." But Bob explained to Roger, if I got divorced, my parents would hate me. Then I'd have to pay all this child support. It would just be much easier to murder my family, and I need your help. But, Roger, said, "No, thank you. If I change my mind, I'll let you know." Roger considered going to the police after that, but he never did because of his reputation, and he thought it might get turned around on him. He didn't like going to the cops anyways. He had a bad rep with the cops, and the cops didn't like him, and he kind of just kept him to himself, but he instantly regretted it the second he heard about Liana and Eric's accident. Bob had a good rep, and, he made this accident seem very believable at first, and it took a while for Roger to speak up to the police about this phone call about killing Liana and Eric a month before. Before the funeral of Liana and Eric, Bob took Roger aside and said, "Hey, I just want you to know that I didn't do this. You know that, right?" And Roger didn't want to start anything, so he's like, yeah, I know. But deep down, he knew that this was no accident. He knew what Bob had done. But in the end, the deaths of Liana and Eric Duke were ruled as an accident, and Bob was able to collect $60,000 in life insurance. After that, Roger stayed away from Bob. He kind of cut ties and left him on his own. He tried to put everything out of his mind, whatever, who knows if it was an accident or not. The cops ruled it an accident. I'm not going to interfere with them and their beliefs in what happened. He's just going to move on, cut ties with him. In the fall of 1998, Bob actually moved to Houston with his brother Mike, and it seemed like everything was back to normal for Roger in the small town of Green River and Bob in Houston with his brother. And Roger constantly thought about that phone call and the incident, but deep down inside he said to himself, even if I went to police, that would not bring Liana and Eric back. And I know he was really upset with his marriage and, not being able to live his young 20s. And after he took care of that or the incident happened, he won't kill again. I'm just gonna forget about it. But the thought was constantly in the back of his head. Then Bob calls Roger again from Houston and asks for an automatic weapon. And then he asks Roger, hey, I know you didn't help me the first time, but I'll give you a second chance. Will you kill my parents? Bob told Roger again, I will give you $20,000 and you can go shoot my parents, hide out in their house. And, you need the money, and either way they're gonna die whether you do it or not. So you might as well take the money and do it for me. But this time, Roger went and did the right thing. He went to police, and when he showed up at the police station to give him the report, the officer that he had chose to talk to was one that he had gone to school with, was the only one he felt comfortable talking to about the situation. And from the detective's notes, he put that Roger was in quite a panic when he showed up at the place to give his report. His name was Detective Meekum, and before they met up, he had called Detective Meekum and over the phone, and Detective Meekum really wanted Bob to just talk to him over the phone, just tell me what's going on. But he's like, no, we have to meet in person. And he went on to tell the story about the first phone call and then the incident with Liana, and then now the second phone call about the parents. And now Detective Meekum says, okay, so I'm gonna get the FBI and we're gonna record your phone calls, and I need you to have Bob admit to that phone call about killing his parent. And so they did. Roger called Bob, and Bob wasn't shy. He went on and on about how he wanted the insurance money and how he just needed to get them out of the way so he can have this extra cash, and he was in a little bit of a financial situation, and he did. He admitted the whole plan to Roger and how it was going to happen, how he was going to be in the house with a gun, and when his parents came home, he was going to have Roger shoot them. And of course, they arrested Bob, and they also arrested Bob's brother Patrick because he was also in on this killing the parents thing. When they arrested Bob and Patrick, the police went up to the parents and asked if they would like to listen to the phone call, because they said, there's no way my boys would do this. This is ridiculous. And they said, no, we have the recording, want to listen to it. And they refused. They would not listen to it. So, Bob got charged with conspiracy to commit murder, and he was sentenced 10 years in federal prison. Roger got really nervous when he heard the sentencing of 10 years because he thought, 10 years is really not that long. And Bob's going to know it was me. He's going to know I helped the police. And as soon as he gets out in 10 years, he's going to come after me and I'm going to be next. And he was thinking of every certain way he could help the police keep Bob in jail longer than 10 years. And they said, at this time, there's nothing we can do. We got to keep the sentence that we have. And so Roger asked the FBI to be put on a protective order. And unfortunately, they told him he did not qualify, but they said, let's reopen the Liana and Eric case. So they had to break the news to the families that they were going to exhume the bodies and send them off to the labs to have some more autopsies done. And it came back that Liana did have a bruise on her throat, and they thought, maybe were they strangled before, and then he threw them off the cliff? Were they strangled and they were already dead, and then he threw them off the cliff? But overall, the hyoid bone was not broken, which means there's no way they could have been strangled beforehand. So now the question is, did they fall or were they pushed? There was no forensic or physical evidence to show either side. Were they pushed? Did they fall? It even came down to them making dummies that were the exact same height, exact same weight, and they did different simulations of pushing them off and letting them fall off on their own. And the only time it ever made a difference is if they had a running head start. But other than that, they landed different every single time. That was not going to help them. And it ended up being kind of a waste of their time. So they decided after the phone call with Roger and the FBI and Bob, they're going to retry the case 5 years later. 2 counts of first-degree murder. Bob was very unhappy, and he continued the story of the accident and told the same story over and over again. But they took the jury to the cliff where the incident so-and-so happened. The jurors walked along the edges of the cliff and looked down. and they were shocked. They could not believe that any parent would ever let their kid play right there, whether it was an accident or not. It was unsafe. You should not have had their kids there ever. They also played the phone tapes of Bob planning to kill his parents to the jury. Roger also testified about the phone calls, not just the one with the parents that the FBI had recorded, but the one month prior where he was asking Roger to kill Liana and Eric with the gun at the barbecue and possibly kill other neighborhood kids. After the trial, Crystal Robinson came forward. Crystal Robinson was a girlfriend of Bob Dukes while he was married to Liana. Crystal came forward and said, "We used to go to that exact cliff, that exact lookout over the reservoir. We used to drink beer and make out, and Bob would constantly tell me how he wanted out of his marriage." And she asked the same question as Roger, like, get divorced, and he would continue on about, no, there's no way I can get around it without paying all this child support. And this became a key evidence in the case because before she came forward, Bob had told the police that he had never been to this overlook before ever, and that there's no way he could have planned it or pushed them off. He didn't even know that that cliff was right there and that, there's no way. But when Crystal came forward and said, we used to sit here and make out and drink beer right here over this lookout and talk about how much he wanted out of his marriage, they knew that he had lied to the police. He had been there before and he knew the area. Bob took the stand and he repeated the same story. And after 8 hours of deliberation, the jury decided he was guilty of 6 counts of murder, 6 to life term, 4 of them being consecutive. That day that the jury decided, Roger ran into the courthouse to find Liana's parents. They came forward and gave Roger a big hug and they said, "Thank you. Without you coming forward and telling their story, we would have never known what would happen to our Liana and our Eric." I'm going to play a tape from Roger about how happy he was that he came forward.
I told her father I was sorry, and he thanked me for coming forward. I feel responsible for the murder because I hadn't said anything, and he thanked me. It was tough to hear thank you from her parents.
This is a production of Mystery Media Group.
Yay!